Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and Red Dead Redemption's Undead Nightmare was straight up one of my favorite games of all time, and while I wait impatiently for Rockstar to give me zombie Arthur Morgan, I figured I'd just make my own. I don't trust my ability to wing horse anatomy, so I printed out a skeleton horse upon which I will trace my armature outline. I also don't want you to pay too much attention to the size difference between the man and the horse, as about halfway through I'm going to decide that I like the Arabian horse more than a thoroughbred, so we'll end up making Arthur slightly larger than this paper shows. Now this was my plan all along, and it was definitely intentional, and was by no means an accident, so shut up, you're not my mom. Now with my arms and spine sorted out, I can start putting it all together on a sculpting block. So I've drilled the holes just large enough that I should be able to get a pretty good friction fit, but I can still take them out if I need to fix anything, like, for instance, if the very first time I attach the legs, I realize I've got them backwards. A couple dabs of super glue will hold my spine in place long enough to get some thin wire wrapped around the joints, and then I'll also reinforce them with a little epoxy putty before it's time to start bulking the body up. Normally I'd be all about saving money on clay by bulking the majority of the body out using aluminium foil, but this is going to be a zombie horse, so I want to leave lots of room for carving out sections of the main body so that I can have some ribs and guts and other inside things on the outside. Plus, this way it ends up weighing a lot more, and as we all know, when something's heavy, it's much higher quality. So even if the end result sucks, it'll still be ridiculously fancy since it weighs several kilos. At any rate, at this point I've got the general shape of the body sorted out and I can start adding in the muscular detail. Now I name all my horses in games Steven with a PH regardless of sex because I think animals with people names is just about the funniest thing in the world. So instead of saying this horse, I'm going to be calling him Steven from now on. Now speaking of Steven, it's time to cut his head off. I've made sure the proportions are correct while the head was attached, but it is a lot easier to add all the details without having to work around the entire body. Now I want to start with a fully shaped head so that I only need to really remove material to get to an appropriately sized skull, since horse skulls are on par with the rest of their bodies in that they are super weird and they creep me out. Horse teeth in particular are the stuff of nightmares. Of course, Steven is a zombie horse, not a skeleton horse, so I'll make sure to cover the majority of the skull in some well-used skin. Then I can reattach his head, close the gap, and start hacking into his body. And then once I'm happy with how unhappy Steven makes me, I'll go over the entire body with a healthy dose of isopropyl alcohol. This will help soften the top surface and blend in a lot of the scratches and seams that I don't want, as well as get rid of a lot of the fingerprints. Then it's into the oven for the first bake. The problem with using so much clay is that little pockets form underneath, and when the air heats up it needs to escape and you're left with these little cracks. Fortunately, they're pretty easy to fix by filling in the gaps with a bit more clay. Then I can get on to adding the little bits of viscera and slimy nasty parts that will connect the ribs and any of the bones in the muscles. I'll usually use cause clay for this step since it's quite a bit stickier, and once it's baked, these little pieces are much less likely to fall off. I'll also add ears at this point since his bald earless head is giving me an ulcer. And it's time to cover all that detail up with a saddle. I probably could have done a little bit more planning ahead to avoid doing all that work on something no one will ever see, but if you came to this channel expecting a plan, you're gonna be disappointed. After all, planning ahead is like studying, and studying is for nerds. I prefer to wing it and see what happens. It's why it took me 8 years to get a 4-year degree and then decide I'd rather make cringy videos on YouTube full of outdated memes. And once I finish the saddle, it's time to add all the little details like straps, buckles, and all the little bits and bobs that draw the eye away from the anatomical mistakes I've made. Finally, with my harness and bridle finished, a whole bunch of tiny wormy dealies will work as Steven's mane and a long wormy dealie will be his tail. Now I know that zombie Arthur Morgan probably isn't going to be sleeping, but I wanted to make a bedroll and 2021's been a rough year, so I treated myself. Otherwise, Steven's finished and it's time to get started on zombie Arthur. So this will be the exact same process as making the horse armature, except it's a person. So, more arms and fewer legs. I'll also use Steven's saddle to give Arthur's skeleton an appropriate riding stance, then it's on to the old clay-on-wire adventure we all know and love. Now making folds and pants is as simple as adding tiny wormy dealies then blending them in. Find a good reference is to put on my favorite pair of assless chaps and then slide forward in my chair, which causes them to bunch up in a way similar to how they would look when you're riding a horse. Now, if you are going to be using assless chaps, I do recommend wearing some kind of underwear just to prevent fabric-related friction burn on your undercarriage. Otherwise, a quick coat of alcohol will soften the edges and I can start adding the dirty detail in. I've added a belt and some spurs, and then I'll toss it in the oven to cure it before getting started on the upper body. This follows basically the same process as the pants, where you get the base layer down, then add wormy dealies until it looks like a bunched up shirt. Like everything else, I want to get the completed shape of the outfit first, and then I'll come back with my knife and add the rips and tears afterwards. This gives me a good idea of where things will sit, and it also plays into my inability to plan ahead. Speaking of ahead, let's make one. So while looking for good zombie inspiration, I came across this picture by XCNs on Reddit. Now my first thought on seeing this was, oh damn, they're actually making Undead Nightmares too, before realizing it's just dope-ass fan art. Then my second thought was, hey, I don't actually have any artistic talent, I just copy what other people do, so why not bring this dope-ass fan art into the third dimension? So I'll start by making a spooky little skull and then building everything on top of that. As I so often do, I got a little carried away while making my skull, and I ended up adding a lot more detail than I needed to, given that most of it's going to be covered up anyways. And it's into the oven to cure it, and I can start building outwards. Top tip here, if you're not particularly good at portrait sculpting, make a zombie instead. This way you can hide a lot of the glaring issues behind gaping wounds and broken limbs. For instance, I was having trouble getting Arthur's nose right, so I just, didn't add it in. Now anytime I play a game, I basically make myself, which is pretty easy to do because I'm a white dude with long hair and a beard, and game developers still seem to think that only white dudes play games, so the vast majority of protagonists are white dudes with beards. Now all this to say, I gave Arthur a beard. Otherwise, once I've got his hair in place, I'll give him a quick scalping so that I have a nice flat surface to add his hat. I don't know why a zombie would be carrying a 6-shooter, but I had these perfectly sized brass tubes lying around, so I figured, why the hell not? Maybe Arthur's retained a shred of his humanity and stalks the wasteland hunting the undead remains of his former posse, or maybe I just wasn't sure what to do with his hands.
I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
At any rate, with the majority of the body finished, I can start adding all the little details in, like his gun belt, his Indiana Jones satchel, and the various belts and straps. I also figured a shirt was a little too pristine given the whole zombie thing, so I ripped up his right sleeve and added some metal damage to his forearms. Then I can do a quick check to make sure he still fits on a Steven and appreciate the size difference between Arthur and his Arabian steed. So Arthur is 6'1" and an Arab stands around 5 foot at the shoulder, so this is okay, just like I planned all along. Then the only thing left to do is add Arthur's left hand on the saddle horn and give him his patented black bandana. And we're finally finished with the sculpting and it's time to get painting. I'll start with a nice black primer, followed by a white zenithal highlight. A zenithal highlight helps to show where the light would fall on a subject if the sun was directly overhead, and it helps with shading as you build up the layers. And it also makes it look like a statue covered in pigeon shit. Brown's going to be a recurring theme here since Steven is a dark brown and there's a lot of leather, but I tried to mix up the shades so they don't all blend together. Dirty brown washes will help make everything look a little bit more weathered and worn, and a nice bright blood red base coat will really highlight all the gnarly damage. And then the bone sections all get painted with a bone white. And his eyeball gets the old zombie cataract white, and I can finish him off by painting the metal parts with a bit of silver. Arthur is a bit more fun because he's a bit more colorful. I'll start by base coating his blue shirt blue and his brown pants brown, and his boots and his hat get a thin layer of black. I started by giving his skin a pale jaundicey yellow, but decided to go all in on the zombie green. It's a bit more fantastical, but it's a zombie cowboy riding a zombie horse, so I think we left historical accuracy behind about 10 minutes ago. Otherwise, it's the usual bone white for the bone, blood red for the blood, and leather brown for the various leathers. And of course black for his bandana, and I gotta give him those spooky white eyeballs. Now I realized at this point that his blue shirt is a bit too blue, and given the state of everything else, I need to tone it down. I don't want to repaint everything, so I've mixed up a bit of white ink and matte medium so I can apply a thin layer of whitewash over the blue. Once it dries, it should hopefully look a little bit more worn down. Highlighting the frayed edges with brighter white helps, and then I'll basically dry brush the entire model with a light brown highlight. This makes all the sharp edges really pop and gives everything a great weathered and worn look. Then I'll add some blood stains by applying thick globs of red wash and letting it dry in little pools. This has the tendency to stain the edges darker and makes for easy but great looking stains. Finally, I'll cover all the bloody sections with a high gloss varnish. That means the painting is done and it's time to make a base. I'll use Steven to mark out the size I need for my base. Then I can whip out some plaster to give it some texture. And once it's dried, I'll paint the base brown. I'm going to be covering it in grout, but it's not a bad idea to paint it anyways in case some of the bottom shows through. My grout's an off-white and I want this to be a reddish brown color, so I'm going to use some of my pigment powders to get the color I want. Then I can coat the base in a thick layer of PVA glue and sprinkle the grout liberally over the top. Some little rocks and stones will add a bit of color and size variation, then I can activate the grout by spraying it with water. It wasn't quite as red as I had wanted, so I dusted the top with a bit more red pigment, but once it's dried it should be rock hard and ready for grass. This is static grass, and it's the tits. And this is a static grass applicator, and it is also the tits. Basically, it charges the static grass with enough static to help it stand on end, so all you need to do is put a layer of glue on the base wherever you want the grass to grow, and then let the applicator do the work for you. Of course, it's worth making sure that your battery isn't dead when you add the grass, since that's a pretty important part of the process. And once you put new batteries in the applicator, cleaned up the non-static grass and reapplied your glue, and you're good to go again. I like to build up my grass in layers, adding a bit of glue over the tips of the previous layer to help add some variation in the height. I would have liked to add a little bit of tufts of longer grasses, but I don't actually have any longer bits, and I didn't want to cut up my paint brushes just for the sake of some dead grass, so I'll make do with these little dead bushes. Finally, I'll add a bit of light green flock because I like it, then I can stick Arthur and Steven in place. Last but not least, I'll take a bit of my mixed up reddish grout and strategically dust the entire model to give the whole thing a nice dusty appearance and help tie it into the base. And with that, I think we're on to the Glamour Shots. There you have it, folks. I hope you like this one, because it's been sitting on my to-do list for ages now, and I'm chuffed to bits with how it turned out. So let me know down below what you think and what you'd like to see next. I'm thinking something Elden Ringy with all the explosion of gameplay videos on the YouTubes right now. As always, a massive thank you to my patrons who keep this channel running and ensuring, if not quality content, then at least regular content. And a very special thank you to my newest patrons, Lime Tree, Robert Adami, Therese Hoyaraska, Gerald, Rebecca Weir, Fanguy Films, Jade Bown, Guild of Arts and Crafts, Donald Pratt, Gabe, Samurai Gaming Mike 3000 Jr., Haley Wildcat, TK Ingalls, Hedvig Nordenfors, Quentin CH, Jordan Rosenberg, Von Zabender, Yikes Production, Grumpy Raven, Tracy Ackerman, Ollie Tarrant, Bob Vetus, Chloe Whitby, Walker Cheverton, Addie K, and Sam Busby. You are the decomposing ligament that holds my gangrenous undead arm attached at the shoulder. If you'd like to help out, then head on over to Patreon. The link is in the description below. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Cheers.